Welcome to mypersonalfootballcoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another show. Before we get into the show, just want to say if you're enjoying the podcast, please do leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast or pick it up. Really would appreciate it. It really does matter a lot. And also just want to say quickly a big welcome to Renegade Soccer out in Texas in America. Welcome them to the My Personal Football Coach Club partnership. Great to have another big club on board from America. Obviously the My Personal Football Coach Club partnership is unique. Nothing else like it in the world. Obviously all your players get access to the app. It's branded with your club logo. You can check the usage, set the players' challenges. There's new videos every week, hundreds and hundreds of technical challenges on there. And all your coaches also get access to the My Personal Football Coach Coaches Pass, the online resource with hundreds of drills and tutorials, and obviously weekly video sessions from some of the best academies in world soccer, and they get that absolutely for free. And it's the most economical one as well. I guarantee you that this no one's going to beat us on price. So we really try and make it affordable for everybody, and it's the only one trusted by Premier League academies such as Arsenal, Wolves, Middlesbrough, West Brom, Birmingham, many more, and obviously grassroots clubs all around the world. So if you're interested in taking your club, your players to the next level, drop me a DM and we can set you up a free demo. But now back into our guest this week, our top guest, someone who is really making waves in women's football out in America, is Freya Coombe. Freya is now head coach of Angel City FC, the new franchise expansion club out in America, based in LA. So Freya's got a really interesting and inspiring journey. Started a coaching journey in England, worked for the FA, did grassroots coaching, worked around Oxfordshire and worked at Reading in the girls programme, then decided to move to America, where she worked in grassroots soccer, then got a big opportunity, a big break at Sky Blues, which is now called Gotham FC, the women's pro team. Interesting story, it's really interesting actually, and then did really well there, and now she's been getting this big break now to manage this huge new expansion team, which the owners include Natalie Portman. So really interesting project, and someone who's got a lot of gold and knowledge to share. Obviously the top coach who's now top of her game and top of the women's coaching game. So a real inspiring journey, one I know you're going to enjoy. I'm really privileged that she agreed to come on the show and share a story. So without further ado, let's get into the show. So Freya Coombe, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
Can you just give us a brief outline of your playing and coaching journey up to this point, please?
Yeah, so playing wise, I was obviously playing in England for a long time. Never really went and did the overseas college thing in America. I wanted to, but I was a little bit old and didn't have a lot of access. This is like kind of pre-internet days of doing a Google search and finding out a place to go. So I played in England. Unfortunately, tore my ACL when I was about 19, so that limited my opportunities to really sort of play up the coaching pyramid. So play up the playing pyramid. So the big thing for me was just getting into coaching from an early age. I actually got into coaching working at Port Vale when I was at university. We had to take a coaching badge as part of my course. So I did my level 1 and then went and worked for Port Vale Football in the Community, which was a great experience for me. And then managed to get a job with the FA when I finished college, and then started working for Reading. And I think at Reading Football Club, that was really where I found my sort of passion and also where I really got into it, and, you know, in that professional pathway that they had. So I worked with Reading for about 8 years, playing on the side, started to play with other clubs, but then joined Reading towards the end of my career when I was sort of in my early 30s. But working with the coaches at Reading, with Kelly, Phil, and the others that are there was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, being able to work with their development team and with their sort of U17s at the time, that was a great experience for me, and I think set me up for this future. Then I moved over to the US. I knew I wanted to live abroad and try something different. So I moved away from Reading and came over here and started again coaching grassroots but knowing that I wanted to get back into working at a good level. So worked in Connecticut for a grassroots club, then got a job in New York with an academy, and then was able to get into professional coaching with, it was Sky Blue at the time, then became Gotham, and then now Angel City. So big thing for me at that time was I did my B license over here, and there was a coach on the course, and he was one of the instructors, and he was, what do you want to do? You're a talented coach. What's your career pathway look like? And, I expressed to him the desire to want to get back in the pro game. So he said to me, where's your nearest pro team? I said, Sky Blue. He's like, right, you need to go in there and do some observations and get your face known. So I went into Sky Blue, and unfortunately at the time they'd just sacked their coaching staff. So there was the goalkeeper coach was left, and he was the only coaching staff member left. So I went in to observe, and on the very first morning, he was like, oh, can you help out with one of the drills? So I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And then at the end of the session, they were like, can you come back in tomorrow and help out and run a session? So I was like, okay. And then that night they said, oh, can you come to Portland? We're playing in Portland this weekend, and we could do with an extra pair of hands. So I was like, yeah. So I flew into Portland on the Friday morning, was there, and I was like, what do you need me to do? And they were like, oh, can you work out how we're going to beat Portland? I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'd watch the games on the flight. I was like, I think we should do this, and this is a good way of going. And we managed to get a draw in Portland, which was huge for us at the time. I flew back and heard nothing of it, and then 2 weeks later I got a call, and I was like, actually, can you come back in on a regular basis? And from then I got the interim job, which was not a usual pathway into the game, but I guess it's amazing. That experience from Reading, and then and then going into it, being prepared to go in and take a session.
Quite amazing. So we've known each other for quite a long time, quite a few years. So I've known that backstory. It's quite an amazing story. So yeah, you've gone in there to observe, and you end up getting the head coach's job. And I suppose it's just, like the old thing about talent and opportunity, right? You just got to have the opportunity, and then, as long as you've got the necessary talent to do it, you can take it with both hands. Quite interesting. Let's just wind back then. Talk about time in Reading. What were you doing at Reading in terms of coaching?
Yeah, so I actually came in as I was done a sports psychology master. So I actually came in as like a sports psychology consultant at the time, just to help out with some of the young players that were in and around like the Youth England team. And I'd done my coaching badges too. So I came in and started to work with, I think it was like 8 of their elite players that were showing promise in their academy. And then, so enjoyed that part and getting to know the coaches. And then I got an age group. So then I worked, so I was working with the U17s. And then that was the time when they were restructuring all the centres of excellence and things. So I had my B license. So I was the technical director at the time for the academy, and then took the reserve team. So it was great sort of, seeing the players come through and develop, and working with Kelly really closely to have that pathway from the academy. Then they went into the JMA and the school program, and then they came into the women's side. And then I had my hands on the development team as well before they came in. And Kelly and it was Jane Ludlow at the time were managing the first team. So I was kind of helping with some of that talent coming through and coaching the development team and the U17s.
Tell us about your coaching philosophy at that time. What is that? How did you create that? How did you see the game? What sort of football were you playing? What sort of sessions were you putting on? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, so Reading had a great curriculum. So they had a very distinct style of play that they wanted. They wanted players to be on the ball. They wanted a lot of possession. So a lot of that was set by the club, but it was one that I really shared in terms of a playing philosophy. And I still carry it with me in terms of, how that shaped the possession style that I like to play. But that was really great. And then the big thing for me was with my personality, and I think having that sort of teaching background as well, was being able to provide a framework for the players, but giving them a lot of autonomy, a lot of choice to go out there and express themselves. I was never a coach that's yelling a lot on the sidelines. It was more around, okay, bring yourselves in now, let's talk about it, let's try and problem solve what you're facing, but very much giving them the freedom to go out and play. And it was a really great time for me, and a really important stage in shaping my coaching career.
Did you have much chance to see what they were doing in the boys' academy, the men's academy? The only reason I'm asking, obviously, because Reading have such an amazing, prolific track record in the men's side of the game, and like always overachieving. Was there like a close relationship between the girls and the boys program?
Yeah, really close. So at the time, Lee Heron was head of community, but he was overseeing a lot of and seeing what was going on in the boys' academy. And then he was involved in the women's team as well at the time. So he was making sure that there was good crossover. And then we had some really great coaches there that were, taking an academy age group with the boys, and then we're also working with the women. So that was really great to have, those coaches that were sharing those practices. So Chris and Phil Cousins and those guys. So it was, I was learning a lot from them. And you had people like Eamon Dolan, who was so approachable, such a nice guy, really, really great. And always willing, if you ever saw him, to share and to sit down and talk. So that was really brilliant, a brilliant experience for me.
So talk about then a little bit about then your decision to go to America. I mean, so you've gone from quite like a senior role in a get celebration program. You're going to go and work in, do some of that grassroots stuff like what I did as well. So lots of time in the grass. Talk about that decision and what was the main challenges and differences you experienced in those first few weeks or months coaching there.
Yeah, so I just got that itch to go and do something different, and I wanted to live abroad. And for me, America was a great place just because of how sport was valued here, the opportunity for women to be involved in sport and treated, at a high level. And then, have that whole experience of just doing something different. So I thought I'd come back at some point to England, but I moved over and I had a great time right from the get-go. I felt at home here, which was cool. But I think some of the big differences, I'd come from an academy and then I was working in grassroots. So obviously the level of play was a little bit of a shock just, at the town and the club I was in. But also just getting used to the structure of it, where the academy, you'd play one game in a weekend. And then you come over here and it's like 3 or 4 games at times. And it's a little bit crazy. I was like, how can they play at their best and then play again and then play again? But I got used to that in terms of some of the culture and like going to tournaments and they're just playing all the time.
What about the difference in like the football culture? Obviously, experience at Port Vale and the work in the FA and the Reading program. Because obviously, I worked there on the East Coast, particularly like women's football's arguably more popular than men's football there. What was that? What's the general football culture like and the women's game like, and when all those sorts of things you noticed?
Yeah, I think the women's game, obviously everyone's behind the US women's national team here and, they've been hugely successful and popular. So, there's that good culture there around following the women's team. I think club football was pretty similar to England in terms of not a huge following in the local area, but I think that's changed dramatically now in both countries, which is awesome. But I think that, the style was slightly different in terms of, how the game was played. Obviously, the American game is very athletic and the players are like amazing athletes. And just the training mentality was very different in terms of how hard the players worked and how hard they trained, even just participating at a grassroots level. So that was really interesting to see. That I think the training and competitive mentality over here is insanely good. So that was good to see, and just how people were so dedicated, and the number of times in the week as well that they trained was huge. So we'd train 3-4 times a week with games at the weekends, and that was definitely more than they were training in England at the time.
And then tell us something about, so then you go in to get this amazing opportunity at Sky Blue. So how did you beat Portland? How did that go? What was that like, and having to try and set a team up to, you've gone, obviously you worked at Reading, so you worked with like those players on the elite pathway before, but now you're at the highest level of the game. And so what was that like? What were the main challenges? What were those things, experiences, those takeaways from that first game?
Yeah, the first game was kind of crazy because Portland was the team where, the crowds are absolutely massive. The stadium's brilliant. So I walked out and it was the first game after the players had returned from the World Cup. So we had Rocky Rodriguez, who had been playing with, she'd been away internationally with Costa Rica, and then was there, and she was kind of walked in and was like, "Hi, who are you?" But we didn't have some of our US team stars yet in that game. But Portland were a great side that was sitting at the top of the league. We were unfortunately sitting at the bottom of the league, so it was quite a gulf. So it was a bit of a park the bus moment. So be defensively super compact and not try and give anything away. And to be fair, we got a lot of shots against us especially in the first half. But then we stayed with it, and we'd done some passing patterns the day before and some crossing and finishing, and fortunately for us, it paid off, and that was how we got our goal. So it was one way where we thought we could beat them, and it was a great finish. I remember it well. It was Amani Dorsey finished it from the edge of the box. It was brilliant. But yeah,
you got the 1-0. So you got the 1-0 victory then?
No, 1-1. They'd scored on us.
Take that.
Yeah, we took. Yeah, it felt like a victory. We all left incredibly happy about it. But no, it was very much around, we knew that they were strong. It was just be defensively really compact and see if we could nick anything at the end of the game, which we did, nicked a point. But it was kind of crazy when they all came back from like international duty, and Carly's like, who are you? I was like, hi, I'm your new coach. You don't know who I am or anything, but don't worry about that. It's fine. So
tell us who are some of the names you had on the team then, some of those big players you had come back.
Yeah, so Carly Lloyd was a big one for us. She came back from the World Cup, and worked with her until the end of the season, and then subsequent years. But so she was a big one. Rocky Rodriguez, playing for Costa Rica. Estelle Johnson, who's she plays now for Cameroon, as well as she's still at Gotham. So we had some big players that were really fun to work with.
So then tell us then, say, excuse me, get through that first game. So then telling me about your average sort of working weeks, and because I'm interested like that, that transition. You're working the grassroots 3 or 4 times a week, and you're into like headfirst into a full-time program with some of the top players in world soccer. So what's what were the main challenges, and what you're delivering, and what are those, give us some of those details of what was going on the grass there.
Yeah, at that time it was really tough. So we didn't try and over deliver with anything. We had to strip it right back. We didn't have a lot of staff to finish off that season, and we had pretty much 6 weeks left. So it wasn't worth bringing in the whole team and recruiting again, because the season was going to end. So we just stripped it back and did what we could. So between myself and the goalkeeping coach, we were cutting all the film, doing all the sessions, making sure the players were prepared, coming up with a game plan. And it's quite a stark difference to where I'm at now, where we have, our analyst, and we have a team of coaches, and we have, a football conditioning coach and our head of sports science, and we have all these different people. So, but I think, at that time, it was just a case of let's strip it back, let's deliver the basics really, really well, and get through. And then obviously at Gotham, we invested in more staff. But the week's busy, you're looking at, we typically train 4 days leading up to a game, and then have recovery day off, where we're looking at getting the analysis done. The players are in typically anything from 45 minutes session to hour and a half session, depending on the day of the week. And then they have to stay and do their own work in terms of, some of their recovery, treatment, rehab work, gym work. So their days are a little bit longer. But it was quite a different experience from, sometimes when you run into a youth training session and it's like, okay, what am I going to do today? And you can just pull a session from the back of your mind. But, at that grassroots level, and then suddenly you're coming into this professional level, and it's like hours over the details in the sessions. So the preparation was quite different.
So then tell us about then, obviously, so you do last 6 weeks, I suppose, just trying to firefight and get you through to the end of the season. And then so tell us about this next season. What was that like then, in terms of prepping, your pre-season? What did you, how did you go into the season? What was your ambitions in terms of how did you want the girls to play and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so then, we managed to get new goalkeeping coach in, new assistant coaches that were coming in and working. And we did a week of pre-season, and then COVID hit and we got shut down. So we came in with all these ideas and all this game plan. And then it was like, right, you're being shut down. And then we were back on Zoom and trying to deliver, film and looking at our principles and how we want to play, delivering that to the players on Zoom calls and things, and trying to establish that style. So that was like completely interesting. Then we got called in, and it was like, right, we're going to have a preseason tournament, or we're going to have a tournament that's going to replace the season. It's going to be in Utah. It's going to be a month long. So you got to prepare for that. So we had, I think, 4 weeks lead in to prepare for that. And then, so that was kind of weird, because it was like, right, I've got this new team, this new way of playing, I've got new players in, you've got 4 weeks, and then you're going to be on national TV and having these games in this bubble. So that was like a whirlwind, and trying to get a lot right. And we saw a good progression between each of the games when we were in Utah, but the schedule obviously was really, really tight. So you're playing every 3 and 4 days. So the players didn't really have a ton of recovery or a ton of time to have actual training sessions to implement new things between the games. And then we all came out of that, had I think a couple of weeks off, and then we had a full series, which was like a mini season. So it was really only until like last year with Gotham that there was like, right, we've got a proper season and we've got a new team and we can actually get going. And then I changed clubs in the middle of it.
Well, then tell us about that then, last season then, just before we get into the Angel City and and all the Hollywood buzz over there in LA. Just tell us about that Gotham then. So I'm just, because it's like, what was that like? Must have been obviously exciting, but what are the main challenges going into like a new season? So right now you got your team, you got your time. Obviously, fingers crossed, no COVID related. What was your vision of how did you want them to play? I mean, what was, give us an idea of like, what formation were you going to play? What was your, say game model, but what sort of the ideas about what was your sort of intention to, how did you want to pose yourself, your style of play on the team and on the league?
Yeah, so for the most part, we played a 4-3-3, but we had some teams in the league that played a slightly different system. So we had to adapt to try and meet it. Portland were very successful last year playing a 4-4-2 diamond, and North Carolina play like a 4-2-2-2, like the old Brazilian style. So we had slight changes when we played against those guys in terms of our formation. Sometimes we went in a 4-4-2 diamond to try and match up more directly. And then we also went in a 3-5-2 at times, just to try and get those matchups and the overloads in different places. But for the most part, we want to be able to be a team that builds out the back. We want to be able to progress through the lines and play a very progressive possession style of play. And then, be able to penetrate through teams, centrally, rather than relying on going over or out wide in order to beat them. And, defensive compactness was huge, and we did a great job with the team of being able to stop goals going in and to be defensively hard to break down and hard to beat. So that was a great experience, and was really proud of how the team played an attractive style.
Can you give us an idea, like for example, what would be a typical week? So Monday, you talked about 1 hour 30 minutes, 40 minutes. What would you be working on? What would be the topics? How would you break it up? How do you utilize your teams, your members of staff, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so typically after playing in the weekend, we'd come in on a Tuesday, and it'd be like a standard re-entry day. We'd do a lot of possession, a lot of passing, just getting them touches on the ball and opportunities. Wouldn't do a whole ton of shooting or stuff to a big goal on the first day with it being re-entry. Just wanted to look after any lingering, hamstring, quad soreness going into it, and just making sure that the players had a moderate day. Then typically Wednesday was a bit more intense, play a lot more smaller sided stuff, usually a 5v5 tournament to end training, and working on a lot of our intense possession, but making sure that session was longer and at more of a higher level of intensity. Then typically Thursday 11v11 tactical day, looking at sort of preparing for the opposition. And then Friday, game day -1, short, sharp, have the players in for a very short period of time, just getting them, that level where they feel prepared for the game and activated, but nothing overtired. And then going into a game on a Saturday. So, really had great staff that were able to lead part of the session, specialists in possession. Then we had, our set pieces that we wanted to work on, that our goalkeeping coach led, which was great. And then, our sports scientist who was able to monitor the load and report back, giving us the reports on the day and making sure we were hitting the targets that we needed to, or just noticing anything from the data that might highlight a player being a bit more susceptible to injury based on the load that they've either had or not had, making sure that we're getting enough high-speed running and sprinting in to prepare their hamstrings ready for the games, especially when we did a lot of work in smaller spaces. So looking at any supplemental runs or training that they needed to do to make sure that they were physically prepared as well.
So what was your coaching team then, just at Gotham there that last season before you left?
Yeah, so I had goalkeeper coach, 2 assistant coaches, a sports scientist, and then we had a athletic trainer and a physical therapist that worked with the group. And then we had some volunteer analysts that came in and helped us out from time to time, which was really useful for them to be able to, cut film and code film at the moment, and turn that around a little bit quicker. And then, now it's a much bigger team. It's pretty huge at Angel City.
Save that for a bit. We'll go on to that in a minute. Just were there any challenges in terms of like now? Because obviously, I'm just thinking, obviously assuming Reading, obviously it's a tighter budget as well, and they've gone to you've got quite a big staff there. What are the challenges in terms of managing them and utilising them and making sure you get the best out of these guys?
Yeah, I think it is. It's definitely challenging in terms of, that coming into football, it's full-time job and some, in terms of, I think coming from my background, it's like, let's make sure everyone's rested and let's feel good about ourselves. And, no one's, mentally fried from work or burnt out. But, coming into the season, that's kind of part and parcel of football sometimes. So that part was hard, and just knowing that everyone's working 24/7, but always trying to, try and get some joy out of it. But, there was a team I know that I brought in people that were very, very good at their job. So it was basically trusting them and giving them the autonomy to deliver. And if things weren't going right, then we would come in and talk about it. But for the most part, is giving those coaches the autonomy to deliver and trust in them and trust in their work.
And I remember personally again, doing tournaments abroad, and there might be a couple of hundred people watching, something like that. How does that feel when you're in, in the stadium and you've got, all those people there and the pressure's on, you've got to make the decisions? How is that acclimatizing to that sort of in-game pressure situation? I mean, I assume it's a lot more challenging when you've got, all those bodies in the stands as well.
Yeah, it's fun, to be honest. We've definitely, when you've got a big crowd in, you feel it and you can see that the players are up for it a little bit more. But there's pressure, but I think there's pressure, whether there's one person there or 10,000 people there, because I think nowadays people on Twitter are going to get to you anyway, so there's always pressure.
Interesting. So let's talk about then. It's like, so ironic, you're based in the East Coast now. You've gone out to the West Coast to Angel City FC, and obviously, ironically, now you just popped back to New York while we're chatting to you. But tell us about the Angel City then, this new club in LA. Tell us how that came about and a little bit about the background. It's quite a unique sort of project going on there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so they're an expansion team. So the league added 2 more new teams to the league this year, so taking us up to 12 teams. And Angel City was, a club that we'd heard a lot about, had a very strong sort of online presence and marketing, and had a very strong message, even from the get-go, in terms of the creation of the team, how they were going about doing things differently, whether it's from, the investment structure that they had, where it was more replicated of a startup like California company, rather than sort of how usually it goes around with the football club, just having one owner and investor. So, you've got tons of investors that are all investing in this club, and the club's looking to change the landscape. And I was sat watching it from afar and being like, well, that's a great project, a really interesting project to be in, to see, and it's going to be amazing for the league. And then my GM called me and said, Angel City have asked to interview you, is that something that you'd want to do? So I was like, I didn't interview for the Gotham job, in terms of, coming in as interim and that whole process. I was like, I've never really interviewed for a pro job. So I was like, I'd like that opportunity to do it. So I interviewed, and then, they offered me the job, and that was like, I didn't think it was something that was going to happen. So that was really exciting. And to be honest, like, I just, with what they were doing, I knew it was something that I wanted to be a part of. A big thing for me was the amount that they're doing in the community, and how they're really establishing and have invested in heavily in their community, not only as, to make the community fans, but also in terms of raising the standards in the community, and being on point with the message. So, that was a really interesting part for me. And, I accepted the role.
Wow. What was the interview like? I mean, just as like, was it? What was that process, and how intense and how challenging was that?
Yeah, so the first round was I presented to the sporting director and the head of performance in terms of how I wanted us to play, which would be who would be some of the key players I'd look to bring in, the playing style, how I would work tactically to change situations within games and different scenarios, who would be my match day team, how I'd want us to train. And sort of went through all of that, and then that went well. So then the second round I had was with the CEO, and she came on the call as well, and then had a subsequent round of interviews that was more about sort of myself, my growth, what I wanted to do with the club, how I fitted in with the values of the club. So yeah, it was great. It was sort of a 2-part process, but I was also really live interviewing all the time because my season with Gotham was still going on. So when I had the calls and the contact with the sporting director or with the head of performance, they were referencing the games and things that were happening at the time. So I felt like that was also part of the interview process is, they were observing how I was on the sidelines and seeing the changes I made in my games at the time. So yeah, I think that was all taken into account.
Interesting. So then it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because you've gone from, just being thrown in the deep end, you've got to see yourself for a season, then all those things. And now it's suddenly at a club where you're starting from scratch, aren't you, really? So I assume so. I mean, in terms of what point did you go in? How much of the squad have you, been able to bring in and have an effect on and that sort of thing when you first went in there?
Yeah, so my recruitment, I was still at Gotham for a period of time, so they were already recruiting players and building the team while I was still at Gotham, and then I stepped away from Gotham but didn't start with Angel City, so there was a bit of a break in between. So a lot of the recruitment process had sort of, the foundation had been done, so I really came in for looking at the players within the league and the expansion draft. And working with the sporting director, but the sporting director is very much in charge of recruitment and sort of bringing the players in. So a lot of that had been done either already or, it fits under her remit. So my job is really to coach the players that are there.
And so tell us about then, your first few sessions. What were the main differences, the contrasts and the similarities to what you were doing at Gotham and the environment and things like that?
Yeah, so the very first session, we had some of the owners and of the club there, so that was kind of weird. And it's like I'm coaching a session and Natalie Portman's watching me. Yeah. So that was definitely a little bit weird and different from Gotham. But in terms of how we set the sessions up and the structure, there's a lot of similarities because that reflects who I am as a coach and my coaching philosophy and how I want the game to be played. So a lot of that structure is similar, but obviously the personalities are very different, and I'm introducing the players to a new way of playing, especially with the way that we had the expansion team and having an expansion draft. So you pick up players from all the other clubs within the league. So everyone's coming from a different style of play. And, where they've been playing for, some of them for 10 years at the same club, or others that maybe have been there a few years. But now you're bringing them in and it's like, right, trying to adjust and bring them into how we want to play, which obviously takes a lot of time. But it was kind of like trying to think at times where it was like, okay, this is what I do at Gotham and it's this successful, and then bringing it in, and then you realize that, oh, actually the players have never played this way before, and it's like, okay, let's take it back a little bit. But we've seen great progression with them, and it's been good.
So how far into the season were you when you started?
So I took over obviously with Angel City. First day of pre-season, we're there and have those players.
Okay, you're in the first day of pre-season.
Yeah, so been training them since the start, since the first time we were allowed to kick a ball together.
Interesting. So then you go in, and so what was it? Were there any challenges in terms of what are the main differences? I mean, working with those big players in that new environment, trying to get them to maybe play a different way to way they've been used to playing. What are any challenges around that? I mean, spending a little bit more time on certain things or that sort of thing.
Yeah, so trying to recreate some of those conditions. So a lot of the work, like doing a lot of possession work, bringing the area size in so it's a little bit tighter, a little bit faster, and that was different for some players. Other players loved it and were able to just get going because they'd done a lot of that previously, or were a bit more used to it either in their club or with the national team. So yeah, it was just kind of bringing them in together and trying to get that exposure and trying to get that that progression of how we want to play throughout the weeks. But we just finished up with week 8, so we're still quite new into the process.
So week 8 of pre-season.
Yeah.
So then you're on a little tour at the moment, or you're on just time off, or what?
Yeah, so we've just finished. We've played 4 games of the Challenge Cup, which is like a cup tournament here, which we're using as pre-season in order to get our squad together, ready for the start of the regular season, which is April 29th for us. So we've just played 3 games in a week. So we've given our players a little bit of time off. We've got a break in the fixtures. So, they can recover and regenerate, get some personal time. And then we're bringing them back in this weekend to train again.
And then when does the season start?
April 29th.
April 29th. So what are the hopes and ambitions for the Angel City FC in its first inaugural season? I think they call it, right?
Yeah, so we've said that we wanted to try and make playoffs and be an expansion team that has success. Typically, expansion teams finish bottom of the league, just historically, because of the struggle and how hard it is to be an expansion team, bringing players in, trying to mold them and have success. And the league is so competitive. It's crazy. Like in this league, anyone can take points off anyone, and it's an amazing league for that basis. So we've said we wanted to try and make playoffs, which is the top half of the table. But we appreciate that we've got a long way to go. But that was our aim from the get-go. But I think if we're looking at April 29th, we play North Carolina at home. We've got a 22,000 capacity stadium at the Bank of California where LAFC play, and for us, we want to sell that out, and we want to be able to put on a good performance and be able to get something out of the game.
And what about youth? Tell us about youth. Obviously, your background in young players and stuff. What's it like? I mean, is your aspiration to play young players, bring young players through? Does the club have an academy? I mean, is it planning to? What's that situation?
Yeah, so we don't have an academy at the moment, and that I think that's something that we would like to branch into and do down the line. But the system's kind of a bit strange over here because you don't really get rewarded for bringing in players. There's no homegrown rule or anything. So all the players that come in that have been at school have to go through the college draft. So you could spend, years developing a player, and then they have to go through the draft, and then only for someone else to pick them up. Right. So I think until those rules change, it's really hard to have that investment into, a ton of players until they can bring in those rules. We've seen it with other clubs that have had players. There's a player at Portland who's come through their academy, but she's had to go to court and to fight to be able to play for their first team. Wow. And she's a young player and under the age of 18. So for her to come in and play, it had to go to court, unfortunately.
Wow. What about, generally, getting young players in who you've just, recruited for the draft? What's that like? And, in terms of the challenges, that old adage, younger players make more mistakes, whatever. I mean, have you experienced that, or are you sort of standing by youth? I mean, how do you balance that out?
Yeah, so I think they could come from the draft at different levels. I think you see some players that come out of the draft that are ready to go right out the gate in terms of day one, and they're prepared. And then you see other players that need a little bit more time, that they still have talent, but whether it's adjusting to, the speed of the game or just, their fitness to be able to play for, extended periods of time, and then the speed of decision making when they get fatigued and the type of decision that they're making under fatigue. So that's usually some of the mistakes that you see from the younger players coming in. The college game over here, depending on which team they're in, they could be playing 90 minutes or, they could be playing 20-minute intervals, and then they get a line change, and then it's like another 20-minute interval in the second half. So, they come from that environment, and they come in and it's suddenly like, right, you've got 90 minutes at the highest level that you've ever played at. And, wow. Asking them to cope with it. So you often see that little bit of a change, and they get a bit more into it as the season goes on.
And tell us a little bit about off-the-field coaching, how important that is. I mean, we talked about your busy week now, and imagine that's very intense. What sort of stuff you do away from the grass?
So with the players?
Well, first yourself as a head coach and as a staff, how much work are you putting in, and then we'll come to the players after.
Yeah, so it's a lot, right? In terms of, putting on training session, as you know, and with so many staff, it takes a lot of meetings and to be able to coordinate what we want to do. Then there's a lot of review process, whether it's a review of the session, whether it's a review of the game, whether it's preparing the strategy for the next game. So it just feels like there's a ton of different meetings that take place throughout the good day. And then you finally leave the training ground late at night, and then it's like, okay, cool, I need to do X, Y, and Z ready for tomorrow. So I find that there's not a lot of downtime in the job, but that's one thing that I want to try and create a little bit more time for myself, and that separation. But being in California now, when we do get some days off, I'm trying to take up surfing to
nice.
Yeah, so just to relax myself and get some time away and in the water.
Is that you though? Do you have to organize that? Do you organize that schedule for all those things? So, the analysis meetings and those sort of things. Is that up to you to organize all of that, or is that put in place for someone else?
Yeah, so we have a head of performance that works with us, Rob. So Rob does a lot in terms of like the scheduling around managing the medical team and the sports performance team. So he'll take care of a lot of that, and then we meet regularly to discuss and to work around setting new objectives, and just meeting up to get the progress of with players, whether the injured players return to play. So we'll have a lot of that, and then coaches will fall on me more so on the technical team.
And then tell us about these players then. What in the modern game at the very highest level, what sort of stuff, and how long are the players doing away from the grass, away from the pitch?
Yeah, so a lot of our players we try and keep the training sessions pretty short and sharp, but a lot of it is around them looking after their body, whether it's meals and nutrition, whether it's the gym sessions that they have to do, how long they spend activating. We've got some in our team that have their own businesses, so then when they finish training, they have to go and devote a few hours to their own business and running and managing their brand and their business that they've got. So that takes up some time. And then also certainly with this club, there's a lot more media attention, so there's a lot more player appearances, and players having to fulfill sponsor opportunities and obligations. So that's certainly something that's been different in the women's game coming into this club. What
about like individual analysis, for example, you're saying, okay, we've got a game coming up, how much time is spent on that? Maybe you've got your centre backs to watch the striker or that sort of thing.
Yeah, so sometimes spent on that, and it varies between the players, whether it's player led and they're coming to you with, these are the clips that I want to go through, or whether it's like, okay, you need to come and see me and let's sit down and go through some of this. But, we're lucky we've got a great performance analyst that will work with the players and put a lot of those clips together, and then we'll sit down and do some small group meetings, or individual meetings with the players, as well as doing group film in the team meeting that's held on a daily basis.
Wicked. And what about like individual training? I'm an individual coach. What about individual stuff? How much time, opportunity do you get to work with them individually, and in that sort of respect?
Yeah, not as enough as we'd want. We're lucky. We've got a great technical coach who works with us. And
who's a technical coach?
So Hervé. Right. So he came from Orlando. So he's working with our players, and so we'll do some work mostly after the sessions, but we want to try and sneak some work in beforehand, or if they've got some off days. But I think it's such an important part of the game. The players are really good at managing it themselves. So they'll often stay after training for extra time, and they're either working on, whether it's set pieces or some extra shooting or some extra touches. So they're really good at taking that ownership on. And then we have our coaches that go around and sort of work with them. But I'd say that 90% to 100% of the team usually stay and do extra on certain days. We try not to do a ton of it on game day -1, and usually they're too tired on the third game day -3 when we're doing a lot of intensive work. But yeah, it's so important, as in terms of getting that individual development, and even at the age that their players are at, and some of the best players in the world, they all stay and do extra, and it pays off. Like I haven't seen any of the real elite players and the national team players that I've worked with not do any. It's massive.
What's your, because obviously a lot of coaches will worry that the players are doing too much, and then there's a lot of talk, that modern players are surrounded by cotton wool. Obviously, they're loading and things like that. What's your attitude to that? There's some point you've got to say, look, come on, guys. Like you say, if it's a game day -1, got to come off the pitch, or how do you manage that? And what's your thoughts on that generally? Players doing extras and doing more.
Yeah, so I'm all about it. I think the players feel prepared when they feel like they've ticked every box going into game day in terms of stuff that they need to work on, or even just things that they just need to have that maintenance of. Whether it's the way that they shoot on goal, or working on a particular, that final separation touch, whatever it might be that they're working on, they need to feel like they've prepared and keep mastering it. But there are days where we're like, right, guys, that's enough in terms of you've been out here, the session has produced this much in terms of the load and the volume. And you need to be off the field now, especially in California. Sometimes that heat is like a real part of that in terms of, okay, we know that we've got X amount of hours before we're expected to play, and you need to start tapering off and get the time off your feet. So it's getting that balance, but I'm always someone that wants to let the players go out and do extra.
And what about yourself now? Like you're like established name now, and the highest level. Now you've gone to this massive new club franchise. How do you keep improving yourself? How do you keep at the highest level, at the cutting edge, and keep improving yourself?
Yeah, it's hard to do sometimes because you can get like wrapped up in the day-to-day of the club. But I think the biggest thing for me is making that real effort to do it, having conversations with people at work, allowing the coaches that I've got to lead on areas rather than me saying out, and being very dictatorial in terms of it's going to be done like this. Be like, okay, show me different ways in which we can approach this and different ways we can do it, because it's often that you get great ideas from within a team. And then like watching games, like watching Champions League and watching Premier League is, and just seeing how the coaches are working there, some of the decisions that they're making, reading up on, sometimes when you get all these on social media, when they sort of break down games that they've had and how the coaches have approached it, just reading that. And I think that's really interesting. And obviously going and doing my licenses, not so much in terms of some of that content, but just in terms of the conversations that you have with other coaches that you meet that are at similar level of development to you. That's always really valuable, and through that coaches network.
Do you have any like role models in the game, people you look up to and that sort of thing?
You might laugh at this one, but Lee Heron at Arsenal is always Lee. Like a big, obviously we both know him, but Lee's, a big mentor definitely. To me.
Absolutely, one of the top guy, and absolutely he's top. Absolutely agree with that one. So yeah, good. Did Leo enjoy that little shout out? Now he's listening to the podcast. Top guy, top coach. Yeah, absolutely. So and what about then? In terms of the future, what does the future hold for you? What's your aspirations in the game?
Yeah, a great question. I think the big thing right now is just to keep developing with Angel City and make the team successful. We want to be able to achieve some of the goals that we've set ourselves. And for me to just keep learning and keep pushing myself in terms of the style of play, and getting better, and having those feelings of when you walk off the field and it's like, yeah, that nailed that today. That was really good. So, trying to get towards more of those moments.
What would your because it's quite a incredible inspirational story now you got there. It's good, you worked really hard, you got to the you're top of the game now. What would your advice be to a young aspiring, particularly female coach who wants to break into the game and make it at the highest level?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just keep going through different experiences. So, when I got my opportunities at Reading, I was a sports psychologist that came in as a consultant. I was doing coaching at that time for Oxfordshire, like football in the community at Oxford United. So I was like keeping, all different areas within the game. And then I was teaching at a university as well. So there was everything that I was doing was to make me a better coach. It wasn't just time on the grass. It was, knowing about the psychology and understanding some of the theory around coaching. So exposing myself to, different areas of the game that would make me a good coach, looking for different opportunities, like getting involved in Reading. When I was doing a sports psychology consultancy, I was a volunteer. Then they brought me in on a part-time contract. Then it was, part-time contract, but coaching as well as doing some of the elite stuff. And then the biggest thing is you don't always get it right, but just keep going. And there's times where you're like, oh, I'm not very good at this, or, you know, I struggle, or they're really, really good and I'm not like them. And it's like, no one's expecting you to be the finished coach. Like, what is a finished coach? Everyone's still learning every day. So just don't keep making the same mistakes, but keep putting yourself out there.
I suppose, yeah, and also you say put yourself out, you talked about working for free at Reading, and then you went to observe at, at Sky Blues, and then you got the job, right? I mean, that must be a real, big lesson learned there. And it's like, say, putting out networking, put yourself out there, go and see, and then the opportunities might come.
Yeah, and like when we were at Sky Blue, and then we became Gotham, we had a coach that came in as a volunteer assistant, and she was coaching in the evenings, and a really, really good coach. But, came in and was like, I just want to volunteer. I just want to be around the game. This is where I want to be. So can I come in and just, even if it's just collecting cones, putting up footballs, but she was far too talented to be doing that. So we got her in, but just that willingness to come, and she was willing to do anything possible within the session. And then, we went through that COVID time, and then it was like, right, you've got a full-time job with us. Absolutely brilliant. And now she's I think she's one of the best coaches in the game, and in the league over here. She's absolutely brilliant, but wasn't, she was willing to do it just to get a foot in the door.
Amazing. Freya Coombe, thanks so much, and good luck for this season.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.